Health and Human Services. On behalf of the College of Health and Human Services and Youngstown State University, I would like to welcome you all to the first annual Centophony Symposium. This symposium is a result of a generous gift to Youngstown State from the James and Coralie Centophony Foundation. I wish to acknowledge the members of the Foundation Board who are present here tonight, and if you would please stand when I call your name. Mark Graham, Carol Potter, Dante Zambrini, and especially members of the Centophony family, Joe, who is James's brother, and David, who is James's son. Thank you for this magnanimous gift. The Centophony Symposium is a medium for bringing outstanding speakers to Youngstown with the goal of raising awareness of the difficulties and challenges facing vulnerable groups in our society. Consistent with James Centophony's commitment to helping the disadvantaged, the symposium is directed at promoting a spirit of shared responsibility and common concern for human dignity. Tonight, our inaugural speaker is an individual who understands vulnerability and the challenges associated with overcoming adversity. Benjamin S. Carson, Sr., MD, is Professor Emeritus of Neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins University. Prior to his retirement in June 2013, after more than 40 years of medical endeavors, he served as full professor of neurosurgery, oncology, plastic surgery, and pediatrics at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. He directed pediatric neurosurgery at the Johns Hopkins Children's Center for over a quarter of a century. In May 2008, he became the inaugural recipient of a professorship dedicated in his name, the Benjamin S. Carson, Sr., MD, and Dr. Evelyn Spiro, RN, Professor of Pediatric Neurosurgery. Among his many accomplishments, Dr. Carson was the first surgeon to successfully perform separation of craniopathic Siamese twins joined at the back of the head, and that was in 1987. He was also the first to complete a successful separation of type 2 vertical craniopathic twins in 1997 in South Africa, and he performed the first successful placement of an intrauterine shunt for a hydrocephalic twin. Dr. Carson holds more than 60 honorary doctorate degrees. He's a member of the Alpha Omega Alpha Honor Medical Society, the Institute of Medicine, the Horatio Alger Society of Distinguished Americans, and many other prestigious organizations. In June 2008, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Bush, which is the highest civilian honor in the land. He has literally received hundreds of other awards during his distinguished career. Dr. Carson is president and co-founder of the Carson Scholars Fund, which recognizes young people of all backgrounds for exceptional academic and humanitarian accomplishments. His 5 books, Gifted Hands, The Ben Carson Story, Think Big, The Big Picture, Take the Risk, Learning to Identify, Choose, and Live with Acceptable Risk, and most recently, America the Beautiful, Rediscovering What Made This Nation Great, all provide inspiration and insight for leading a successful life. Please join me now in warmly welcoming Dr. Benjamin Carson.
Delighted to be here with you tonight. Thank you for your kind invitation. Normally my wife was with me also, but we had a granddaughter early this morning. So she was actually due on November the 6th, but I think she was listening to the news. I don't know. But she's doing fine, and that's the important want to talk a little bit about some of the things that happened in my life to create the philosophies that guide my life now. But, you know, medicine was my dream. I loved anything about medicine when I was a kid. On television, on the radio, somebody mentioned a doctor, a TV show that had a doctor on it, I was right there. I even liked going to the doctor's office. So I was kind of a strange kid. You know, I would sacrifice a shot just to be in there. And going to the hospital was the best thing in the world because I could sit there and listen to the PA system. Dr. Jones, Dr. Jones. That just sounds so important. I've been thinking one day they'll be saying, Dr. Carson, Dr. Carson. But of course they have beepers now, so you still don't get to hear it. But, you know, this is a land of dreams. Something that's been so important over the decades, over the centuries. So many people coming here thinking that their hard work, their imagination could achieve something that they could not achieve in other parts of the world. It's really one of the most important things about America and why it's so important that we preserve that. Well, you know, when I think back to how important that dream was to me, sometimes that's the only thing that pushes you when things get tough. Thinking back on that dream. But dreams aren't always good. Sometimes they're bad. And you may remember the case of the Bijani twins. The 29-year-old Iranian women joined at the hip. Their lifelong dream was to be separated. They scoured the planet looking for a team that was willing to take on that kind of risk. When they first contacted me and told them about Chang and Ying Bunker, the original Siamese twins, how they lived to be 63 years old and never got separated. But they didn't want to hear about that. And they kept looking and they found a team in Singapore that had been involved with separating a set of twins from Nepal. And I had actually been involved with that as well. So they managed to convince me to come over and join them against my better judgment. And I must say I was really impressed when I met those young women. They were dynamic, vivacious, and smart. They had learned to speak English in only 7 months, if you can imagine that. They both had college degrees. They both had law degrees. Only one wanted one, but they both had So they had a really good impression of what it is that they wanted to do and what the risks were associated with it. And they said something that struck me. They said, Doctor, we would rather die than spend another day stuck together. And, you know, I thought that was kind of harsh, but I like to do something that I think is a very good exercise. I like to put myself in other people's shoes before I start thinking too much about who they are and why they think the way they do. And I thought about what would it be like to be stuck to somebody 24/7. You couldn't get away for 1 second. How long would you like to live for? But I began to understand what it is that they were going through. And that operation proceeded. We were in the 3rd day of the operation. We were 90% separated. Some people were starting to celebrate. I was not among them. Because when we got to the very end, they began to bleed profusely under great pressure. You put a clip on it, it would rupture behind the clip. Put another one, it would rupture behind it. And they died. There was nothing you could do to stop it. But you know, if you look through the history of surgery, you will see that there are a lot of things that don't work in the beginning. Kidney transplants, in the beginning, a lot of problems. Same thing with hearts, lungs, livers. You would say, why would anybody even bother? The complications are too great. But people learn. And every time there was a failure, somebody learned something from it. That's one of the great things about medicine. We are very careful about keeping record not only of success but of failure, so that people can learn from those things. And that's how progress is made. Outside of medicine also, Thomas Edison said he lived 999 ways a light bulb did not work. So he was learning. Most of you have heard of the cleaning formula 409. Why do they call it that? The first 408 didn't work. But you just persist. You learn. You move forward. Walter Dandy, the famous neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins many decades ago, first one to try all kinds of things, daring and very skillful guy. First one to operate on the posterior fossa. People said that compartment of the head is too small. The tissue will swell, and the patient will die. But he operated on somebody with a lesion of the posterior fossa. And the tissue did swell. And the patient did die. And another, and they died, and another, they died. The first 13 all died. I can't even imagine what he said to the 14th patient. He probably said, nobody's complaining. But the fact of the matter is, he persisted, and he learned. And now we're able to do posterior fossa operations quite routinely and quite safely. And that is such an important factor for intelligent people. Being able to learn from things that have happened in the past, whether they be good things or whether they be bad things. One of the reasons that we have these big frontal lobes, this is where you engage in rational thought processing. You can extract information from the past, integrate it with information from the present, and project it intelligently as a plan into the future, as opposed to just react like animals do. Now I should just take one moment to say one thing, and that is, I am not politically correct, so it is possible I could offend someone. That will not be done intentionally, but it seems to me like a lot of people came to this country from other parts of the world to escape from people, tell them what they could say and what they couldn't say, and what they could do and where they could live and what they had to buy and all this stuff. And I figure if everybody stops bowing to the PC police, pretty soon they'll stop. So when you go out of here tonight, I want you to go out and say Merry Christmas to people. And if they say back to you, Chikista Koda, which is Merry Christmas in Hungarian, or not Hungarian, in Bulgarian, or they say Happy Hanukkah, whatever they say, say that back to them. They'll say Merry Christmas to you. It's a greeting of salutation. How in the world did we allow that to be turned into something that can offend somebody? It just goes to show how easily we can have our chains jerked. And that's something that we have to stop doing, because you see, we, the American people, are not each other's enemies. The enemies are those people jerking everybody's chain and trying to make them think that just because somebody disagrees with them in one area, that they're the enemy. It's called divide and conquer. And that's why every little fissure, you see people trying to drive wedges, be it age, be it income, be it race, be it gender, doesn't matter. Drive a wedge in there. Tell these people that the reason they're having problems is because of these people, and demonize people and say they're the problem. That, my friends, is not good leadership. What good leadership is finding a common vision. Now the Bible in Proverbs 29:18 says, Without a vision, the people perish. Why? Because they're at each other's throats. A wise man once said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. It never has stood, and it never will stand. So what we have to understand is the importance of dialogue. You can learn a lot more from somebody with whom you disagree than you can from somebody who agrees with you all the time. And I always say, if two people agree about everything, one of them isn't necessary. I think everybody's necessary. So perfectly fine to have disagreements. Don't let that make you into enemies. And the best thing that we as Americans can do is recognize that we're all in the same boat. And if part of the boat goes down, the rest of it's going down too. So we may as well learn how to work together and throw away those politicians who are trying to divide us for their own power. Well, you know, there were a lot of problems along the way with me accomplishing my dream of becoming a physician. Not the least of which was the fact that my parents got divorced early on. And that was a devastating blow for a young boy, as you can imagine. I was always hoping that my parents would get back together. But you know, my mother was one of 24 children. And got married at age 13. And she and my father moved from rural Tennessee to Detroit. He was a factory worker. And she discovered some years later that he was a bigamist in another family. And I remember telling that story at a graduation at the University of Utah. Nobody thought it was that strange. You see that? I probably offended somebody. Everybody knows they don't do that in Utah anymore. But at any rate, we ended up moving to Boston to live with her older sister, brother-in-law. Typical tenement, large multi-family dwellings, boarded up windows and doors, sirens and gangs, large, aggressive roaches, huge water rats. In fact, the first time I saw one of those rats, I thought it was a dog. But murders. Both of my older cousins that we lived with were killed. I remember seeing people lying on the ground with bullet holes, and I remember as a 9-year-old sitting on the ghetto stairs, looking through the building across the street, out of which all the windows had been broken, and the sunlight was streaming through that building. And it made me think about my future. And I remember thinking that it was unlikely that I would live to be 25 years of age, because that's what I saw around me. My mother, in the meantime, was working. She would leave at 5 in the morning and get back after midnight. Day after day after day, going from job to job to job, cleaning people's houses. And she worked very hard. But she didn't want to be on welfare. She only had a 3rd grade education, but she was very observant. She noticed that no one she ever saw go on welfare came off of it. So she didn't want to go on it in the first place. She refused to be a victim. And she never felt sorry for herself. And that was a good thing. The problem is she never felt sorry for us either. There was never any excuse that we could give that was acceptable. She would always say, do you have a brain? And if the answer to that was yes, then it doesn't matter what anybody else said or what anybody else did. You could have thought your way out. And in retrospect, I believe that that was the most important thing that she did for us. For my brother and for myself. Not accepting excuses, because if people won't accept your excuse, then pretty soon you stop looking for excuses and you start looking for solutions. And for the young people who are here, I want you to listen carefully. If you find somebody who's always making excuses. It's always somebody else's fault. You're going to find somebody who's not very successful. You're going to find somebody who's not a good leader. And if you find somebody who accepts responsibility and moves to fix things, to make things right, you're going to find somebody that you can place a lot of confidence in. And I hope that that's the kind of person that you will resolve to be. Because it makes all the difference in the world in terms of what happens in your life. Well, my mother hoped beyond hope that we could return to Detroit and she could be independent. And in fact, after a few years, that did happen. Still in a multifamily dwelling, still with significant homework, but nevertheless, and I was in the 5th grade. I was a horrible student, probably the worst student I've ever seen. I thought I was stupid. And what was the point of even trying if you think you're stupid? But I secretly admired the smart kids. I couldn't understand how they knew all the answers. The teacher would ask a question, I would their hand. I would say, they're the same age as I am. How come they know everything? I don't know anything. This is really weird. But it didn't matter, because I was just waiting for the bell to ring and supposed to be out stuff and go home and play. Basketball, baseball, football, dodgeball, any kind of ball, throwing rocks at cars. And, oh man, I love that. How many people threw rocks at cars when they were young? Some honest people. Everybody did it. Because it was fun. Those old people, sometimes they would get angry and they would stop the car and they would get out and they would chase you. And we would run slowly to encourage them. And then when they were nearby, we would go. But sometimes the police would come, and of course, always in unmarked cars. They'd be right up on us, chasing us across the fields, these large fields, tall fences, about 10 feet tall. They would think they had trapped us. They had no idea how adept we were getting over those fences. I mean, it was like an Olympic event. Full speed ahead, leap high onto the fence, let the momentum of your feet swing you over the top, drop down, all in one motion, and laugh at them because they couldn't do that. Well, that was back in the days before they would shoot you. Then when it was too dark to do that, it was in the house to watch TV. And if I was in the house with you, you didn't need a TV guide. I can tell you it was on every TV station, every hour, every day. All the latest fashions, every car going on the streets of Detroit, make, model, year, and price. But that information at 50 cents might get you a can of soda. That's a problem. It's a problem with young people. It's a problem with old people. You ever notice on those Jay Leno show, jaywalking segments? Or Water's World, they go out and they ask very basic questions of people. And the answers they come up with are just astonishing. I mean, they'll say, like, what's the significance of Labor Day? And I'll say, I think that celebrates women having babies. It's just really so sad. And, particularly technological things, this is a real problem. Some years ago a survey was done looking at the ability of 8th grade equivalents in 22 countries to solve math and science problems. We were one of the 22 countries. We came in number 21 out of 22. Couple that with the fact that 30% of people who enter high school in our country don't graduate. And this is the technological age, the age of information. Think of the implications of that. 40% of people who go to college don't finish in 4 years. And many of them have to take remedial courses to do college one-on-one work. What do you does that say about our society and what's happening to us and where we're putting our emphasis? We have to be able to adjust. I was talking to the chairman of Intel. He said, we have a lot of high-tech, high-paying jobs, but we can't fill them with American college graduates. We don't have enough of them who can do that kind of thing. We have to go to China and Japan and India and Singapore and South Korea. Think about that. We simply have got to adjust to the times. You know, during the agricultural age, no one could touch us. We were known as the breadbasket of the world. During the industrial age, our industrial might saved the world from tyranny in World War II. But we're no longer in the agricultural or the industrial age where all you needed was a strong back and a willingness to work. Now we're in the information age, the technological age. And so important that we adjust. You know, the founders of our nation were adamant about education. In the Massachusetts Bay Colony, any community that didn't have adequate educational facilities was fined. There was a time when education was key. When Alexis de Tocqueville came here in 1831 from France to study America because the Europeans were just flabbergasted. They couldn't understand how a fledgling nation, barely 50 years old, could already be competing with them on virtually every level. How could that be? So he was going to dissect it and demonstrate what was actually going on over here. And he looked at our government, and he was impressed by our three-part government and how efficiently everything ran. Now, this was years ago. And then he said, well, let me look at their educational system. And he was really blown away. Anybody finishing the second grade was literate. He could find a beaver trapper on the outskirts of society, and the guy could read the newspaper, could tell him how the government functioned, could have an intelligent conversation. You only got that with the aristocracy in Europe. He was very impressed. But did you ever stop to think about how the settlers were so successful here? How were they able to traverse a rugged and hostile terrain from one ocean to the other? Because they were well educated. They knew how to build roads, structurally sound bridges, dams, containment facilities. They knew how to invent things when there was a problem. They had that can-do attitude, that creativity that propelled us so rapidly to the pinnacle of the world. That's what characterized America. The can-do attitude, which is rapidly being replaced with the what can you do for me attitude. And that's not very helpful. And you think about how America changed the world. 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, 5,000 years before America came on the scene, people did everything the same way. There were no substantial changes in the world. Within 200 years of the advent of America, men were walking on the moon. And it continued to completely revolutionize what was going on in the world because there was an atmosphere created that encouraged innovation, that encouraged hard work. And it's so important that we understand that so that we can learn from that, so that we can make sure that we cultivate the things that encourage that, not the things important because we are the pinnacle nation in the world right now. But what happens if we fail? What if we go down a pathway of other pinnacle nations like Egypt, Greece, and Rome, and Great Britain, and France, and Spain? What if we too, like they did, become enamored of insignificant things like sports and entertainment and lifestyles of the rich and famous? What if, like they did, we lose our moral compass? What if, like they did, we tolerate corruption? What if, like they did, we go down the tubes? Is it possible for us to learn from the things that they did and take corrective action? The same principle applies in our lives. Smart people who advance a lot are able to learn from what they see around them, from the lives that they see around them. Foolish people must repeat all the mistakes themselves before they can learn anything, and sometimes even then they don't learn. Very important concept. Well, my mother was incredibly concerned about me and about my brother. We were not doing well in school. She was so concerned because she knew that she didn't have a very good life because of her lack of education. And she prayed and she asked God to give her the wisdom to know what to do to get her sons to develop themselves intellectually so that they'd have control over their own lives. And that's the wonderful thing about God. You don't have to have a PhD to talk to him. You just need some faith, and she had that. And he gave her the wisdom. At least in her opinion. My brother and I didn't think it was wise at all. Turning off the TV, what kind of wisdom is that? Making us read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Library every day and every week and submit to her 2 written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. She had marks and highlights, underlines. We thought she was reading or what she wasn't. But I was disgusted. Everybody else was outside having a good time. I was in the house reading books. Are you kidding me? Her friends would say, you can't make boys stay in the house reading books. They'll grow up and they'll hate you. And I would overhear them and I would say, Mother, they're right. But we still had to do it. And some people say to me, well, why did you do it? Your mother was out working all the time. She wouldn't have known. Yes, she would have. She would have known. And back in those days, you had to do what your parents told you. There was no social psychologist saying, let the kid express themselves. But an interesting thing happened as I started reading those books. And that is when the teacher would ask a question, and the smart kids would raise their hand. And I would say, I knew the answer to that. I could have answered that question. And that got me excited. And I started reading everything I could get my hands on. If I had 5 minutes, I had a book. Waiting for the bus, reading a book. On the bus, reading a book. In the bathroom, reading a book. At the kitchen table, my mother would say, Benjamin, put the book down and eat your food. It didn't matter. I was always reading. And within the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class, much to the consternation of all those students. And I had just a major transition in the way that I thought about things. And another thing, I used to hate being poor. Some people hate snakes. Some people hate spiders. I hated being poor. I was absolutely certain there was some mistake and that I had been born in the wrong family. But as I started reading those books, particularly as I started reading about people of accomplishment, I began to notice I began to notice that their accomplishment was because of the choices they made and the energy that they put behind it. I began to understand that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. And at that point, poverty didn't bother me anymore because I knew it was temporary. I knew that I could change it. When you can change a situation, it's not nearly as onerous as if you think you have to stay in that situation. And that is such an important concept for us to get across, once again, to the people of this nation. We need people to understand the role that they play in their lives, not the role that somebody else plays in their lives, that can-do attitude. Because the human brain is a powerful system. Hundreds of billions of interconnections. It remembers everything you've ever seen, everything you've ever heard, can process more than 2 million bits of information per second. Some people say, don't learn this, you'll overload your brain. You can't overload it. If you learn one new fact every second, it would take you more than 3 million years to begin to challenge the capacity of your brain. So don't ever let anybody tell you stuff like that, because it's just not true. And with those brains, we have the ability to solve a lot of problems. Now, one of the reasons my wife and I started the Carson Scholars Fund, 17 years ago, we gave away our first scholarships in Maryland. Because I would go into schools and I'd see all these trophies, all-state basketball, all-state wrestling, all-state this, that, and the other. Quarterback was a big man on campus. What did the academic superstar get? A little National Honor Society pat on the head, there, little nerd. Nobody really cared about him, compared to all the hoopla that you got with the athletes. And I don't have anything against athletics, please don't get me wrong. But what will maintain our position in the world? The ability to shoot a 25-foot jump shot? Or the ability to solve a quadratic equation? We have got to begin to put first things first. Critically important. The reason that it's so important, and the reason that our founders thought it was so important, said that our system of government is designed for a well-educated and informed populace. And if they ever become anything other than that, our country will change. Why did they say that? Because they knew that if people did not have enough information to critically analyze what they heard, that all it would take was unscrupulous media or slick politicians to completely change what America is. But with the Carson Scholars Fund, we started giving out scholarships to kids starting in the 4th grade for superior academic performance from all backgrounds and demonstration of humanitarian qualities. You have to show on a consistent basis that you care about other people. Because those are the qualities that we want. And we also put in reading rooms all over the country, particularly targeting Title I schools. These are fascinating places that no little kid would pass up. But, a lot of these kids come from homes with no books. They go to a school with a library and wants to drop out. They don't develop that love of reading and education. We have to find a way to stop that. So they get points for the number of books they read, the amount of time they spend in the reading room, and they can trade them in for prizes. In the beginning, they do it for the prizes. It doesn't take long before they begin to understand how much fun it is to read, because we have the kind of books that kids would really like. And it has a profound effect on their educational prowess. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's why it's so important for all of us to be involved No matter what you're doing, there's a way to get involved. You can get involved with Carson Scholars. Just go to the website. You can get involved with Youngstown State University. You can get a whole host of things. But we have to make sure that our young people are moving in the right direction. Every one of those young people that we can keep from going down that path of self-destruction. It's one less person that we have to protect ourselves and our families from. One less person we have to pay for in the penal system or the welfare system. One more tax-paying, productive member of society who may discover a new energy source for the cure for cancer. We can't afford to throw any of them away. All of them are vitally important to the well-being of our society. And if our society does not remain strong and at the pinnacle, remember, someone will take our place. And the likelihood of them being as benign as we are is very slow. All you got to do is go back and look through the history of the world before America became a pinnacle country. See the brutality that went on, and it will come back. So there is more than one reason that we need to learn from the things that have happened in the past. Well, you would have thought that now that I had everything under control, that life was really going to be good for me. Because when I got to high school, I ran into the worst thing a young person can run into. It's called peers. Peers. That stands for people who encourage errors, rudeness, and stupidity. That's just what they would do on tell you what kind of clothes you should wear and you should be hanging out with. And I got caught up in that stuff. And unfortunately, my grades plummeted. And my mother was so disappointed. She thought that I was going to be different. And there I was casting my lot in with those losers. And one day I was complaining about not having fancy clothes. And she just said, Benjamin, I'll tell you what. I'm going to give you all the money I earned this week. Scrubbing floors, cleaning clothes, doing stuff that nobody else wanted to do. You take the money. You pay the bills, you buy the food, you take care of all necessities. When all the money left over, you go out and buy all the fancy clothes you want. I said, all right, now you're talking. So I sat down, I started allocating money, and in very short order I realized that my mother with her third grade education was a financial genius. And I realized that I was a fool. And I never mentioned the clothes again. And I got back on track, and I was an A student again, and the guys didn't like it. They would call me nerd, point next to their Uncle Tom. But I would always shut them up by saying one thing. I said, let's see what you're doing 20 years. And let's see what I'm doing 20 years. Unfortunately, negative peer pressure does not end in high school. It continues. It's one of the reasons that we have political correctness and all the other stuff that the manipulators use to control the population. We need to make sure that we understand these concepts, because understanding is the key to conquering. And it can be done. And it will be done. I'm convinced of that. But it is important that as we move toward a nation that is united, that we don't treat the dividers the same way they have treated us. Because somebody has to be the adult. Otherwise, you just keep going like a ping pong game, to the left, to the right, to the left, and to the right. You make no forward progress. have to begin to concentrate on some of the severe issues that are impacting our nation. The accumulating debt, which is going to destroy us, very much like it did my hometown of Detroit, because they kept kicking the can down the road, and nobody would take responsibility. And now we're doing that on a macro level, and the consequences will be the same. They've always been the same. They always will be the same. And that's what I mean by learning, being able to observe. And not just learning, but caring. It's a big part of our success going forward. We have to care about all the people in our society. And when we think about solutions, we have to think about solutions for all the people in our society. And we have to understand what true compassion is about. The people at the lowest rungs of American society. We have to find ways to move those people up. You know, patting them on the head and saying, there, you poor little thing. I'm going to give you some food stamps, and I'm going to give you free health care. I'm going to give you some housing subsidies. That's not getting those people out of that position. That's leaving them in that position. That's making them dependent. And the American dream has to be something for everybody. But it means we have to use our intellect. We have to use it in creative ways. You know, you think about schools, for instance. Schools are supported by millage taxes. So schools in affluent areas have more money. Schools in less affluent areas have less money. You know what that does? Perpetuates the status quo. What we need to be doing is thinking about ways in which we can take all the millage money, put it in a pool, and make sure that we have even quality of schools throughout our entire system, so that a kid born in poverty has a good chance. We have to start thinking about fairness and things like taxes. You know, I think it's very demeaning to say to people, you're too poor to pay any taxes. And to say to other people, you're so rich, you should pay all the taxes. That's why I said at the National Prayer Breakfast, proportionality. Because that's what God recommended. You make very little, you pay very little. You make a whole lot, you pay a whole lot, and you all get the same rights. You know, that to me is fair. What is not fair is you take half the people who don't pay any federal income tax, and you say, but you can vote on how much the other half pays. That doesn't make any sense. It's also ridiculous, you know, to say to companies, you're bad because you're doing business overseas. When we have the highest corporate tax rates in the world. You know, that drives people away. We need to bring people back in. So, anybody who sits there and blames a business for doing things that make money don't understand business. People don't go into business to support the government. They go into business to make money. Smart government recognizes that and creates an environment that is friendly for business. We also recognize that government has very important roles, like regulating things appropriately, not over-regulating. You know, after the Great Crash in 29 and the years that followed that, an analysis occurred, and it became clear that the reason for that crash was because banks were playing fast and loose with people's money. There was no controls on the way that they could invest. So the Glass-Steagall Act and other things that were very illogical were put into place. In the 90s, we abolished those things. We said all of a sudden, people are wonderful. They won't do that kind of stuff again. Yeah, right, you know. And it took about 20 years to catch up. But of course that's going to happen. Intelligent regulation makes a lot of sense. Over-regulation makes no sense at all. You know, I do think about all the energy that we have in this nation. We have 8 times more oil than Saudi Arabia, locked up in shale, North and South Dakota, Montana, places like that. But wouldn't it make sense for us to use the technology that we have to make sure that we can get at it in a clean way? You know, rather than giving money to our just a little bit of common sense. That's all I'm talking about. And it's not so much for us. And by that I mean those of us who are older. But it's for those who follow us. We have to once again care about the people who come behind us. You know, Thomas Jefferson said it's it's immoral to leave debt to the future generations. We have to care about them once again. And we have to care about faith in God. You know, the secular progressives are trying to drive God out of our society. If you don't have faith, you're going to have something else as your core. And it's unlikely that that is going to be a good thing. And faith also gives you courage. And to do the things that need to be done to allow ourselves to move in the right direction so that we can work together as a united family, as a people who have vision. We have to have the right core, and we have to have courage. Because it's too easy to go along to get along. But that does not lead to real freedom. Freedom only comes with courage. You think about the beginnings of this nation, people like Patrick Henry, who said, give me liberty or give me death. Nathan Hill, teenage rebel, spy, about to be executed. He said, my only regret is that I have but one life to give to my nation. That was courage. There are many other stories like that. You think about all of those people, those American soldiers on D-Day, who stormed those shores, being mowed down like animals by machine gun fire. But they kept going, and they overwhelmed the enemy. Courage. Courage has characterized this nation. But we can't turn our back on it. I think about those Navy SEALs at Benghazi and how they fought their hearts out to save their comrades before they died. Courage. Something that we must lift up. And if we all have it, it requires less of it in order to affect change. And when you think about Alexis de Tocqueville and his analysis, at the end of this big 2-volume set, he said, they teach in their schools values. They teach the difference between right and wrong. They're not afraid of their faith. And he said, America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. And when you sing, free and the home of the brave. Just remember, you cannot be free if you're not brave. Thank you.
That poor industrialist mother in those education schools. Certainly we want to give credit and thank God for those educators who introduced you and I to the unlocking the secrets of the quadratic equation and the Pythagorean theorem. Introduced us to Leonardo da Vinci, Paul Robeson, Muhammad Ali, Jesus, and of course James Brown. My question to you, Dr. Carson, other than your certainly I don't want to belittle that because it is outstanding, your illustrious career in medicine is well documented. My question to you is, would you please describe, was it an epiphany, the genesis, the journey it took a young African-American male in this country from that environment to becoming what America politically describes as a conservative?
Okay, that's easy. My conservatism, or what I actually call it, is common sense. Comes from observation, from just opening my eyes, looking around, and by having a very strong relationship with God. My role model is Jesus Christ. I believe if Jesus Christ were here today, he would be thought to be quite conservative. But he's also very compassionate. And see, this is what has to be coupled with common sense. Because we can only make progress as a nation if we have compassion and we work in ways that we elevate all of our people and we don't select people out, that we don't put people in opposition to each other, but we draw them together beyond a common vision. Now, some people may call that conservatism. Again, I just think that's the logical way to make things work, particularly if you go back and you look at other societies. You look at societies that were similar to our society, that went on a tear of self-destruction. You look at the kind of things that happened to them. You look at the things that are happening now here. We can make corrections. I don't think it's necessary to point fingers at anybody, because all that does is create animosity, and people want to get over in their corners and throw hand grenades at each other. And that's not what we need to do. We need to be looking at how we can use our collective resources and our collective intellect to solve the problems of our nation.
Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor, for standing up and speaking out. How do you feel about the Common Core education that is now being forced upon us and our children?
Well, I think perhaps the designers of such an ideal thought it was a good idea. The problem with anything that is being forced upon us is that it's being forced upon us. That's the problem. This is America, the land of the free. Liberty is supposed to be important to us. Now, I have a problem, quite frankly, with, government deciding that they know better than you do about what's good for you. When that says that the people don't have any intellect and that they're a bunch of dumbos and that you have to do everything for them, that's absolutely not true. Having said that, is it good to have educational standards? Absolutely, no question about it. That part I agree with, but I also believe that there are certain things that the central core government should do, and there are certain things that state and local government should do. And states and local governments have a lot more connection with what's going on where they are and can control things much better than you can centrally. So, yes, we need standards, but I think, these are things that need to be handled locally. People who can vote locally. And by the way, when I say vote, I actually should have mentioned this earlier. It's vital that the American people learn how to vote correctly. Most people, when they go in a voting booth, they're looking for a D or an R or a name that looks familiar. The name could be Satan, and they would say, yeah, that looks good. We have to get over that. And we have to know who we're voting for, and we have to know what they stand for and what they have voted for. And I wish we had a voting system where you couldn't put a D or an R on it. So the people had to actually know. Yes.
Dr. Carson, first of all, I grew up in Detroit. Secondly, you are my hero. I started teaching in 1985 outside Detroit. You were my example in my anatomy class. I showed videos of your split brain and enjoying twin videos to my students as an inspiration for what you've done and how you've achieved. Currently, I'm teaching in a multiracial school here with lots of variety. But the one thing I struggle with is, where do we get the inspiration? I can't get them to do homework sometimes, let alone go that extra step. What is your suggestion for getting them to that extra step?
Well, you know what? You might tell a little story. Because the people who have the most difficulty, I'm sure you noticed this as a teacher, are the young black males. And, they get caught up in the peer pressure stuff. But just take a walk, an imaginary walk down the street with them. And tell them to think about Jan Matzliger, a black man who revolutionized the shoe industry. And you tell them you take a walk on the street with your shoes and you see how clean it is, and you tell them about Charles Brooks, a black man who invented the street sweeper. Those big brushes and down that street comes a big refrigerated tractor-trailer truck. You tell them it was Frederick Jones, a black man who invented the refrigeration system for trucks, later adopted for airplanes and trains and boats. And it comes to a stop at the red light, and you tell them it's Garrett Morgan, a black man who invented the gas. Garrett Morgan also invented the gas mask, that saved lots of lives during the war. When I talk about the war, Henrietta Bradbury, a black woman who invented the underwater cannon, made it possible to launch torpedoes from submarines. And when I talk about a black woman, you see a beautiful black woman walking down the street. Black man did not invent her, but we call that C.J. Walker, a black woman who invented cosmetic products for women of dark complexion, was the first woman of any nationality in America to become a millionaire and stomach home efforts. You walk past the hospital and you tell them about Charles Drew and his contributions to blood banking and blood plasma understanding, and Daniel Hale Williams, the first successful open heart surgery in the world, and had an operative mortality rate of less than 1.5%. You look at the surgical light, Thomas Edison, you didn't know he was black, but he was a legitimate his right-hand man, Lewis Latimer. was the one who came up with the filament that made the light bulb work for more than 2 or 3 days, invented the electric lamp, did pioneering work in incandescent fluorescent lighting diagram. The telephone for Alexander Graham Bell was a tremendous inventor in his own right. Most people maybe have heard him. He built master railroad tracks. Andrew Beard, the automatic railroad car coupler, spurred on the Industrial Revolution. Elijah McCoy, the automatic lubrication system for locomotive engines. He had so many inventions, people would say, is that a McCoy? Is that the real McCoy? Most people don't even know that. So, and I'm just barely scratching the surface. And you can tell that there's no reason that he should believe that his ancestors did not play a vitally important role in the development of this great nation. But also, you can take that same imaginary walk down the street for virtually any nationality in our nation, because everybody made tremendous contributions, and that's how we reach the benefit.
Again, Doctor, thank you very much for taking the time to come to Youngstown. I mean, of all the cities in this great country of ours, that you thought that Youngstown was important enough to stop here. And are you going to run for president?
I do get that question a lot. All over the country. And, I'll leave that in the hands of God, to be honest with you. It is not something that I desire to do. But what I do desire to do is to fertilize the ground and to help people to really understand who we are as a nation and what is at stake and what are our responsibilities. And if I can get that accomplished, and if, by the time, another year has gone by, and there is, no one who really is capturing the imagination of people, I'd have to give that consideration, but it's not something that I really want.
United States Air Force retired. 9 countries, 23 bases, you name it. I wanted to mention, you mentioned about food and Social Security, funding for people, welfare for people. I want to mention 2 things. Our children in every state are hungry. The single most thing to produce better academic records is food. And I've been to many bases, and the first thing I do is go to the food bank and start to work. We need to address a lot of things in our own country. And all these people and all the teachers that sacrifice their own money to do this for children and to get it done. Please continue, teachers. You are our best forefront for the help of our children.
In America, we do have a history of generosity. Interestingly enough, most people don't know this, but socialism was inspired by the United States. The Europeans looked over here and they saw the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the Mellons and the Fords and the Kellogg's and all these people with tremendous resources. And then they saw everybody else. And they said, you can't run a country like that. You have to have an overarching government that receives all the funding and then can equitably redistribute it. Ever hear anybody say anything like that? But what they didn't realize is that all of those names that I mentioned here in America were not like the land barons of Europe who just hoarded money and then passed it down from generation to generation. Instead, they built the Transcontinental Railroad. They built the infrastructure of this country. They built factories. They built textile mills. They built the mechanism to create the most powerful and dynamic middle class the world has ever seen, which rapidly propelled us to the pinnacle. They built universities and museums and charitable organizations. As late as 2009, 40 of the wealthiest families in America pledged to give away half of their wealth in order to charities. You go to Europe or Africa or Asia and ask the 40 wealthiest families to give away half of their wealth, they'll look at you like you got 6 heads. But we have always taken care of our own because we're charitable people. This is something, as the young lady mentioned, that we must continue, all of us, not just teachers. We must recognize that we are our brother's keeper. That's the way it is. And if we do that, and we have the right attitude, we have plenty of resources. Do you know how much food is thrown away in this country every day? We need to be thinking of efficient and effective ways. There should be no one who even thinks about being hungry in our nation. And there are a whole host of other things. If we begin to think about these things in the right way, there'll be plenty for everybody. If we begin to think about how we release the most powerful and dynamic economic engine the world has ever known, you'll see things happen in this country that you can't even imagine. It's all there, just waiting to happen. And all we have to do is ask God to give us the wisdom to do the right thing, put Him back in charge.